All right. Hey, how's everybody doing today? Doing good? Good? Thumbs up across the board. That's good. It's usually like nap time for a lot of people, so glad everybody's still awake. So thank you guys for coming out. Today we're going to be talking about testing security solutions with the Atomic Red team. It's an open source project we started about a year ago, a little bit less than that, I guess. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So who am I? Not super important. Those are a few of my favorite things. I have been doing security things for a decade plus, really focused on security role for like the last 8-ish years. Doing a lot of different stuff, vulnerability management and assessments, penetration testing, security engineering, architecture, all that good stuff. Right now I work for Red Canary. I'm an incident handler with them, so we do consulting, we do obviously incident handling. But they were nice to let me steal their slide deck, so you'll see the bird in the corner. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? So first of all, we're going to talk about testing, why it's important, and some of the common roadblocks to organizations being able to test effectively. And then once I talk about how bad the testing situation is today, we'll get into some more fun stuff, a proposal for how to do it better, give you some tools so you can go home and start doing this immediately. So let's look at the current state of the SOC. Obviously, this is kind of a generalization, so your organization might be much better or much worse. But this is kind of, having worked with a lot of different organizations of different maturities, different technology stacks, this is kind of what we see consistently. So you have things. So you have security tools. You have your SIEM, your IDS, your IPS. You have your AV. You have your next gen AV. You have your next gen AV. You have all this stuff. Then you have your controls. So these are like your hardened systems. These are the things you put in place so that users can't be users. And then your policies. So things on paper people are not supposed to do, and mostly do anyway. So you have those things, and you expect them to do things. You expect them to prevent evil and to assemble your incident response team like Voltron. And if APT gets past your impenetrable fortress, you want it to be evicted, nuked. You want their families to suffer. So that's what you expect from your stuff. But truthfully, a lot of organizations have significant investments in their security programs and don't actually know if they work. So let's talk about how we got here. How do we build these big programs that we're not sure about? So we build things because it's good security. It's best practices. You saw there was a gap. You went out and you filled it. You made sure that you were taking care of all the different places people could get in. If there was a piece of tooling you needed to get some additional visibility, you went out and tried to get it. Sometimes compliance. Sometimes some governing body says, hey, you have to have this thing, even though you don't think it's particularly effective. You have to have it. And so therefore, if you'd like to know that it's working the way it's supposed to. And expectations. So I'm sure a lot of you have had a manager or some C level that it went to RSA and came back and said, we have to have browser isolation or next gen, all the things. And you're like, oh gosh, okay. So, because Gartner told them to. So you're expected to have these things. I've talked to organizations, and it's like one guy, he's the director of everything, and he's like, yeah, I'm really thinking that I'm going to go for a SIEM next. Like, really? Because you're doing like operations and incident response and security operations. You're doing all the things. You don't have time for any of that. So how are you going to build, maintain, and actually get value out of a SIEM? But that's what he's supposed to get. That's the next checkbox for him. So, people accumulate things they can't actually use. Yeah, it happens, man. I told you, I've been there. So now that we have all of these things, we have the best prevention, the best detection, the best visibility, the best workflows. All of our teams are like really fine-tuned machines working at maximum efficiency and capacity, right? Right? Everybody feels that way about the stuff they have. So let's see how you feel. If you think about the organization that you work with, work for, the security that you have, like do a true assessment on efficacy. So you've got a lot of security. Are you confident that it's doing the things it's supposed to do? Maybe you believe everything is working the way that it's intended to work. Or you hope everything is working the way it's intended to work. But as everybody knows, hope is a feeling, not a strategy. You cannot just hope that all of your security is working because you will get breached. All right, so how do you know it's working? You test it, right? You just have to, if you want to know if something's working, if you want to know if a car was going to start up, you turn the key, right? So you test it, see if it's going to work. So you have to know that your stuff works. And if you are not testing your controls, rest assured someone else is. You may or may not know it. Yes, they're doing it for free, and they're going to give you a bad day one day. So how do we test? Like, we know testing is important, and so how do we go about doing it? There's a couple of different ways that testing happens today. So if you're going out and you're looking at some new piece of technology, and you ask the vendor, like, how do I know that you're doing the thing you're selling me? Of course, they're going to say, hey, no worries, we'll help you test this. So mostly, their tests are going to play to their strengths. And sometimes they're outright rigged. If you ever hear of a vendor who doesn't let you test their software in an open forum, like if only approved vendors can do tests on their product, run from that. I worked for a company, and we were testing an email malware solution, and the guy came in, the SE came in, and he was like, yeah, this thing's so awesome, so awesome. It's like, okay, cool. We need to test this. He's like, I got you. Give me an email address, and we're going to send you malware to that email address, and then you can see how good the tool is. Like, okay, buddy. I'm glad that your tool can catch things one for one in your curated list of malware. Like, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to catch everything. So that's not necessarily a good way to do it. You could try to build your own test plans. But it's kind of hard to get started. Like, how do you know, like, what are the right things to test? How do I take a piece of security tooling or take a control and test it and see, like, is it working the way it's supposed to? Is it actually doing the thing? And then how do you scope and track your progress? Like, are you just, like, if you wanted to test AV, are you just going to go download all of the malware? Like, where do you stop? Like, how do you know how many samples to test before you know you've tested it all? So a common approach that people use for testing is to hire an external red team. There's problems with this. Usually it's a compliance checkbox for a lot of organizations. So somebody at the top knows that they have to have a piece of paper that says this is a penetration test, so that they pass their audits. That's usually not a great way to do it, because the engagement is usually all about, like, okay, hey, just come in, do some stuff, give me a report, and then you're good. A lot of times the boots on the ground guys don't even get to talk to, like, give them some requirements. Hey, test this, test this. They just kind of end up with what they get at the end. Not all teams are created equal. John Strand has a term called pen test puppy mills. So it's organizations that will come in and they will scan your environment with Nessus. They will put it on a very nice Word document, and that is it. That's I'm sure some of you have probably seen that. And if you haven't, I hope you don't. But so there's some great teams out there, some great guys, like, obviously, Laris is here, the Mandiants, the Spectre Ops, the Black Hills, all of those. There's a lot of really good organizations that are out there, but they are hard to get. You have to usually schedule them far in advance. It's hard to get them to come in on a regular basis. And also, it's expensive. If you probably can't justify the cost of bringing in a top tier red team over and over again, like you would need to get good, consistent, iterative testing. Sometimes there's scoping problems, especially in those compliance checkbox situations, because basically they say, come in and hack us. Somebody who's not really in the know. Come in here, just assess all my things. And so, they come in, they go for domain admin. They probably get it. But they're just going to take the shortest route to get there. They're not necessarily going to test all of your controls. And there's long trip times. You may have a test year one, and then they give you some findings, and you go out there and you make sure that that's all covered. And then maybe you have a recertification test. Maybe they come back in a couple months and make sure it's actually secure. Usually you have to wait till the next year. If you're one of those organizations fortunate enough to have quarterly pen tests, then that's a little bit quicker, but still not fast enough. So what's the solution? Do we build our own red team that can do this all the time? It's a great idea. So penetration testing, one of the top top 20 CIS controls. But it's number 20, so it's towards the end of that, but it is very, very important. But the problem with this is, first of all, do you have the interest? Is there somebody in the organization that's like, I really want to do this. I'm really like psyched up to do this. Pen testing is hard, to actually like learn all of the techniques, learn the different tools, really put in time. Like you're talking about work time and at home time. It's a commitment. It's hard. Do you have someone who's willing to do that? And if they are willing to do that, do they have any skills already, or is this going to be a very long ramp-up time? Is your organization mature enough to even be considering this? Like I said, it's an important control, but it is number 20. Do you have your admin rights in order? Do you have patching in order? Do you have all those other fundamentals that you should truthfully have in place before you decide to go out and build a red team? And do you have time? Does your person who's interested and has some of these skills, are they also your firewall engineer? Are they also doing about 6 or 7 other things that they're going to have to put on hold or find other time for? So that's tough. Also, if you wanted to go out and hire somebody, these skills are in high demand and they're very expensive. So you have to go find somebody, probably remote, unless you happen to live in a wonderful mountainous city like Asheville, because people love this place and would come here. But a lot of other cities, like I live in Columbia, and nobody wants to be there. So remote is the only option. And it's difficult to maintain objectivity. If you've ever done any red team exercises in your own organization, you pretty much know where the holes are. You know where the you know how to get your target pretty quick. And also, like, if you see the same systems day in and day out, how do you really go about, okay, now I need to go and target this system, now maybe this system. It's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. You're just, you already have so much intimate knowledge. You might think a system is like totally tight and there's nothing that can be done to it, so you don't even look at it. And there might be glaring vulnerabilities or holes in your visibility. So we know that testing is important, and that we know that outside of a few less than desirable options, most organizations just really aren't testing at all. So how do we fix it? We need ongoing iterative testing. We need a very fast test, build, test iteration loop. So we need to be able to test something. We need to be able to build a detection or a prevention, and then we need to be able to test again to make sure that we've got it covered. We need objective measurements. We need some kind of framework or roadmap that takes us from point A to point B to point Z and everywhere in between. And we need a low barrier for entry. We need this to be something that someone who is doing about 3 other jobs can pick up and do without having to do a lot of installation of third-party tools and frameworks and like gear up on those. And now all of a sudden, like you're spending a ton of time. You have a tool. It maybe does a handful of tests, and you're not sure if you've spent your time wisely. Pause for dramatic effect. Atomic Red Team. So this is an open source project that we created, like I said, about a year ago. It is comprised of discrete unit tests, which I'll kind of cover a little bit in a minute, and those are mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Now, some of you who are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK might be saying, MITRE ATT&CK, so hot right now. MITRE ATT&CK is everywhere. Everyone's talking about ATT&CK. It's, so many frameworks are built around ATT&CK. There's, you got webinars, they got all kinds of stuff. But it's great. So if you've never heard of ATT&CK, so what MITRE has done is they have cataloged a treasure trove of TTPs, tools, malware, like all these different tracked groups. They've kind of put together their techniques, their tactics, the tools that they use, and they've put them in a vendor agnostic form out on the web where everybody can use it, which is great because now you don't have to go by, you don't have to go by FireEye's nomenclature or go by, company X's nomenclature. Like we can just talk about this as defenders in a common language. So it's really cool. What's that?
It's a strange concept.
I know.
Language and collaboration and security.
Who would have thought that collaboration would be a good thing? So.
There goes the family safe ring.
So attack really focuses on the end of the kill chain, so the post-exploit portion. So looking at the persistence mechanisms, the way that adversaries escalate privilege and execute software, malware, how they move laterally. And I'm not sure what the MITRE approved reasoning for why they did this with attack. But in reality, if you think about it, you could look at everything to the left of this bracket, and you're like, okay, well, now I need to be able to detect and prevent all of these things. So detecting exploitation, especially in the day and age of 0 days, is pretty hard because there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's software being owned today that's never been owned before, and that's going to continue to be the case. And it's going to be tough to stay out in front of that. However, when an adversary lands on a system, the things that they do, they're creatures of habit just like the rest of us. So they persist in very consistent ways. They move laterally in very consistent ways. There's a less infinite number of things that they can do on the system, and it makes it a little bit easier for us to track it. As an example from earlier, when the gentleman was talking about TrickBot and ransomware, like Locky and all that good stuff. So ransomware can be delivered in a large number of ways. It's kind of hard to plug all of those holes. However, they usually delete your shadow copies the same way every time. So if you monitor for that, you will have very early knowledge that there's something like that going on. And that's consistent across a lot of those malware families. So this is a screenshot of the Atomic Red Team. It's changed a little bit. We've made some recent adjustments that I will cover kind of towards the end. But essentially, we have a big pile of markdown files that kind of give you your little copy-paste test that you can do. We've got a lot of other stuff in there as well, which I'll cover. But this is kind of the meat of it. So for each platform, MITRE has come up with a matrix covering how they get initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation obviously keeps going. And there's all of these different techniques for each one of those tactics. So each one of those, if you follow the hyperlink, will take you to a test that you can test to see, do I have anything that will prevent this, detect it, so that I can check it off my box and go along. So why do we do this? As I mentioned, testing is very important. We wanted to lower the barrier for entry. This is something that you can do with copy and paste. We wanted smaller targeted tests. So if you're from the programming world, like unit tests is the smallest viable test of a unit of something you want to play with. So in this case, we take a technique and we distill it down into its smallest possible form so that you can take it, run it, and then see if anything happens. So that's kind of the idea there. And then of course we really did this because we want to make as big an impact on as many security organizations as possible, evict the most evil, because we're all in this together. This is us versus the enemy. So this came out of kind of a bunch of people had kind of similar ideas. How do we make this testing thing work for a lot of people? Mike had this silly named Bookish Happiness repo at one point that had kind of the prototype that eventually became Atomic Red Team. So it's been around for a while. We were working on it pretty heavy last summer, and then towards the end of summer, we came out and made it public. So now we're going to look at how it works. And so this is probably a good time for me to tell you that I don't think there's enough emphasis on research and security, Eye of Sauron on the Mac and Linux world. So a lot of these are going to be Mac and Linux. For you Windows guys, there's at least one in there, but just going to kind of cover a couple of techniques, show you what they look like, show you how to execute those from Atomic Red Team, and then show you how you could build a detection capability around that. So kind of operationalizing it very quickly. So this is AppleScript. If you're not familiar with AppleScript, it has some comparatives to PowerShell. It's kind of how programs in the macOS ecosystem talk to each other. You can use AppleScript to tell one application to do something. You can have it run shell scripts. You can have it do any number of things. It can actually talk to another system through SSH. It can do a lot of evil things. And for the most part, it's just allowed to run on all systems. So there are some mitigations you can put in place and make sure that no unsigned scripts can be run. But for the most part, it's something that needs to be looked at and probably isn't. So this is the blurb from MITRE. If you go to attack, you will see this. And this is kind of what it looks like in Atomic Red Team, at least at the top. So this is kind of we pull it in from attack so that you don't have to go and do a bunch of research on what the thing is. And here's the actual test. So in this case, what we've done is we've taken the Empire launcher that uses AppleScript, and you can only see kind of part of the execution there. But do shell script does exactly what you think it does. So AppleScript says, hey shell, I want you to run this command. It passes it to bash, and then bash does the thing, which is pretty awesome.
As the user's privilege level?
Yes. So the question was, is this done at the user's privilege level? It is. And there's ways to escalate that, which we'll look at in a minute. So, after seeing one of those, this is a good time to kind of cover the detection building lifecycle using Atomic. So you test a thing. So you take that little blurb from AppleScript, you put it into your terminal, you run it, and then you say, okay, did I detect this? Did anything go off? Did I have an EDR alert? Did I have a SIM alert? Did I have anything on my system that said, hey, there's something bad going on here? If you did, that's great. So now you still have to keep testing. There's lots of different ways to run each one of these techniques. So you can't just check it off your box and never come back to it. If you didn't detect it, then you have a couple of different things you have to look at. Do you have the underlying telemetry? Is there any kind of raw data on any one of your systems that would have given you this? If there is, that's easy to build a detection capability out of. So you can take that and say, okay, now I'm going to build this SIM correlation rule, or I'm going to build XYZ, so that next time this happens, all the alarms go off and we know that there's something we have to look at. And it's important to kind of mention we want to build resilient detections. And I'll kind of cover that when we look at some of the detection building. But you'll notice that everything comes back to testing again. So everything goes back to testing so that you're always looking at different permutations of the technique so that something can't slip by you just by obfuscating the command line a little bit. If you did not have any underlying telemetry to build a detection capability, it's a great time to say, okay, maybe I need Sysmon, or maybe I need some other tool that will show me this thing. And given, whatever technique you used, maybe you need something that gives you command line. Maybe you need something that has better network capability. Maybe there's too many NATs in your network and you need something that's closer to the host to tell you which host actually made that call out. So another different technique. So this is T1152 launch CTL. So this is this is a command line utility that that works with the launch D in Mac OS. It's cool. Mostly it's there for starting daemons up, stuff like that. But you can also submit jobs. So, for instance, if you wanted a persistent calculator that every time you closed it, it came back, you would do that with launch CTL, which is cool. That's maybe not super useful from an adversarial standpoint, but like if you always wanted to make sure that you had a calculator at your hand, that's a good command to use. So if we wanted to take this little command from Atomic Red Team and build a detection capability, let's see what we would grab. So launch CTL, if you look in your environment, if you have any Mac OS devices, you're probably going to see a lot of it because, like I said, it's starting up those daemons. It does a lot of things under the hood. What it doesn't do a lot is submit new jobs. That is that's very rare. So it's a good thing to look at to see if somebody is putting something that's at least somewhat persistent. It doesn't survive a reboot, which makes it really good for trying to accomplish a task while the user is logged in, and then completely wiping itself out of existence when they reboot. So in this case, we could just look for a process name of launch CTL with a command line argument of submit, and that would kind of give you something to look at there. So this is an output from Jonathan Levin's tool Super Audit. If you have any Mac devices, you might be lamenting the fact that there's not a lot of open source or free utilities to kind of get good data from them. This is an excellent tool, and he actually just added syslog to the capability, so you can syslog straight out from this utility. It's really, really cool. I put the URL down there. So what does this look like if you don't do it with calculator, but instead you decide to do something a little bit more nefarious? This is the part in the talk where I talk really slowly so you don't notice how slow I'm typing in the terminal window because it takes longer than I would like it to, but I was too lazy to recapture it. So what we're doing here is, so launch CTL, I'm submitting, the label is evil Python, which should give you an idea of what it is. And then I am just going to point to a Python script. And that is not evil.py. And so in this case, it's just a little box that pops up that says Python code is executing on your machine. Most adversaries will not do that. That's just something I did for you. So I closed it, and you notice it came right back. And I'm going to close it again. You'll see the script is actually done down there. It's on an empty terminal prompt. But it will keep coming back. So if somebody is running a hidden Python script that is doing like collecting information on your system, it's running some other utilities, waiting for a user to go to a certain website, it could just sit there and they could actually see the Python running, kill it, and think they're good, and it's going to come right back. So it's an interesting technique to look at. So here's for the Windows guys. So regserve32, this is related to a technique that Casey released some time ago, which he named Squibbly-Doo, which I included because I like to say Squibbly-Doo. So in this case, from the Atomic Red team, we have a couple of different options for it. So we have ways to execute a COM scriptlet locally. regserve32 is also internet or network and proxy aware, which is really nice of Microsoft to make it like go right through your proxy and pull a random SCT file from anywhere on the internet and then execute it. It's really, really nice. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's great. So, oh yeah. So yeah, it's really good at executing arbitrary code, which is not, I don't think, the intention of the utility. But so there's three different tests that we have there. Only really kind of the top one is reference, but there's a couple of variables. So you can pass it your file name, and that's where you would execute it. If you go down, it shows you an example with if you wanted to host something on GitHub in a gist, you could do that as well. It's very flexible. And this is kind of what the command line looks like. So if we were going to build a detection capability out of this, we would want to build something that would at least cover regserve32. The -u and the -i are the major components for executing that SCT file, that COM scriptlet. The U is unregister, and I is the location of the file you want to execute. And then scrobj_dll is a script object dynamic library. So at the minimum, you would probably want to look for regserve32 and scrobj_dll. You could probably grab a couple of those others as well, but you don't want to make it too tight. Like you don't want to take this and then just drop it into an alert, because all they would have to do is make a couple of changes. Maybe reorder some of the switches. So you want to make sure that you're widening your net as wide as possible without killing yourself with false positives. All right, so now we're back to my friend AppleScript. So, gentleman earlier mentioned, all this is happening under the user's context, and it's true. If you execute an AppleScript, under a shell that's owned by a certain user, it will execute in their context. However, you could get some really cool information, especially if they're an admin. And in a lot of organizations, like people don't want to deal with Macs, so they just make their owners admins. Which is cool for privilege escalation. So here is an input prompt. So OSAScript just tells the system preferences application to activate and then put up a box that says, hey, we need to get your password to apply some changes. And we all know that users love to give their password to boxes. So they're going to type their password in here. That's just going to happen. And they're going to hit OK, and then it's going to go away just like it's supposed to, like it would normally if that was a legitimate system prompt. And then what that's going to do is it's going to give it to the adversary that executed the AppleScript. And now they can escalate privilege. Now they can go to root, and now they own the machine. So kind of a cool one. The cool thing about this is like in Windows, there's a lot of utilities that can pop up a box and kind of get users to give them their passwords. And a lot of times they look kind of janky, like they don't look legit. This AppleScript like the way that these boxes are popped up and the way that they're built, most legitimate software uses them in the exact same way. So this is a very legitimate looking box to a user. So if we were going to try to build some kind of detection capability, we could take this, grab a couple of sections from it, maybe look for OSA scripted system preferences, maybe just look for the password. I've seen a couple of legitimate tools, legitimately built tools that they will ask for the password in this exact same way, which is training the user to get their password stolen. But so this is something you might see in legitimate software as well. But if you ever see this spawn from like a bash shell or something like that, there's a good chance that there's something sketch going on. And then there's just like a little process tree from CV response down there in the bottom, just kind of showing you what that looks like at the host level. All right. So this is great. So if you built a detection capability based on this, you're probably going to catch this, but you can also execute the exact same thing with a shell. So you could just pass a couple of arguments, call AppleScript, give it some arguments, and the same box is going to pop up. But you're not going to find it with the detection capability you built in the last slide. So the idea, don't forget your ABTs. Always be testing. So remember that loop. Test, verify, build, go back, test again. And then, keep coming up with different ways to do the same things. So we're pretty good for the one-for-ones, right? So let's level up. So we have this concept in Atomic Red Team called chain reactions. It's kind of our way of showing you how to chain some of these things together in a meaningful way. It's like putting Legos together, because we give you all the Legos. Now all you have to do is drop them into a script of some sort, and now you have a much more robust test. You're testing multiple things at the same time. This is a little bit more advanced, so if you feel like you've got things pretty well covered, this is a great way to say, okay, an adversary would normally start doing some recon. Maybe they're going to shove some stuff into a file. They're going to try to exfiltrate it. So that's kind of what we're trying to simulate here. So if you were going to generate a chain reaction, start with like a basic script. You start picking things off the shelf, grab, a little bit of techniques here, a little bit of techniques there, grab something from every column, and then, execute them, see what you find. So I'm going to show you a chain reaction that I built some time ago called Ranger. So what we're looking for here is we grabbed some stuff from defense evasion, a lot of stuff from discovery. So this is really trying to simulate an adversary in the recon phase. So they're trying to find out what's going on in the system, who the users are, what privileges they have, and then it's going to prep everything for exfiltration. So let's look at it. So it's just a shell script. Please, when we get into the code, please don't laugh at me because I'm not an excellent shell scripter. But it works, which is really all that matters to me. So here's a little bit of the code. And you can see I just kind of grabbed, it's Mac Linux aware. So if you run it, you can run it on either one. It will figure out what system it's on and it will do one set of commands versus another. So it's just really grabbing some information from users and groups, dumping those all to a text file in a hidden directory. As you get towards the bottom, what it's going to do is zip all of those up into an encrypted archive. And if you don't have command line capabilities, you're not going to see what the password is, so you might not really ever know what came out of there. So we throw all those into a zip file, and then we bust them up into a bunch of 23-byte pieces. And the reason that you would want to do that as an adversary is because now you can very easily exfiltrate without setting off any kind of NetFlow alarms. Just say, hey, every so often, just send another one of these pieces out until they're all gone. So it makes it very tough as a defender to see that stuff. Especially when they're in random order. That's exactly right. And this is just kind of what this looks like when you get to the underlying like EDR view. So you can see shell spawning like all kinds of things. These are also, interestingly enough, things that admins do all the time. Recon is really hard to find because it looks like legitimate activity. So that's why you want to have enough detection capabilities so that you're looking for each one of these techniques. And when you see a lot of them clustered together on a system, it's like, I could see somebody running, a couple of these, these pseudo commands, these who am I's. Like when you start putting all of these things together, now it's very sketch. Now there's a good chance that there's somebody that's trying to get information on your system. Or it's a new employee. It could be a new employee.
Those are half the commands I've done when I'm a new employee, just setting up my environment.
That's right. Then they think that you're some kind of spy. All right, so we're beyond chain reactions. Let's actually put these tests together with some kind of purpose. So we'll look at APT simulation. And so MITRE is nice enough to track all, they put all these groups that FireEye and all these other, CrowdStrike, these organizations have tracked and, attributed tradecraft to. And then they say, hey, APT 32, they like to use these techniques. They like to use these tools. And that helps us build a chain reaction that is focused on adversary simulation. So first of all, evaluate your threat model. Like know where you work, know who your enemies are, know the tradecraft they use. You could go out there and look at 40 different groups and build a whole bunch of scripts that test a bunch of techniques, and they might not be representative of the people that actually want to come into your house. So know who your enemies are, and then you can just go straight to MITRE, get some stuff and say, okay, now I'm going to mimic this actor. So we have a chain reaction called the Dragon's Tail, and it's based off of tradecraft from APT 32, also known as Ocean Lotus, out of Vietnam, or at least they're supposed to be out of Vietnam. Attribution is hard. So grab a couple of techniques there from the bottom. Obviously, they do a lot more. You can see there's some Cobalt Strike stuff in there, but we're going to focus on a handful of those at the top. So this is we call the Dragon's Tail. You can see a section of the code there. So we're emulating, APT 32 is known for setting up scheduled tasks using the squibbly do, technique that we saw earlier with Register 32. So you can see up there at the top, the scheduled task is being created with that particular script. It runs off the page, and what it's going to do is it's going to pull down an SET file and then execute it. I believe that one executes calculator. The enemy is probably not going to pop calc, but at least you'll be able to see what it looks like. And then there's, we like to clean up after ourselves, so we'll delete the scheduled task. And for the most part, these are all supposed to be safe, but obviously evaluate what you run on your systems. Don't trust me. I might lead you down the wrong path. I'm not in this case, but I could. So a note on simulating APT. So Nick Carr mentioned at one point, I don't know if it's possible to authentically simulate the best APT groups because they have all the budget, they have all the time, they have all the resources. So they can come up with, new, breaking tradecraft every day. But don't let that or, tweets like this discourage you. Obviously not real, but don't let that discourage you. If you can get as close as yesterday to nation state, like you are an apex defender, like you are defending at the highest of levels. So don't look at it like, oh man, I'm never going to catch these guys, so why even try? We have the tradecraft, we know what they do, so why not put it to your advantage? Build some rules, figure out, because what you'll catch is the guys above the script kiddies, the guys that are, trying to use some of the same tradecraft, but not necessarily with the same goals.
You need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun the person behind you.
Exactly. You don't need to outrun the bear, just outrun the person behind you. Make yourself not an easy target. It's a great way to put it. Somebody else will be a lower hanging piece of fruit than you. So what's next? What are we working on next? Actually, probably what's now? So so one of the things that we've been working on and have just released some new goodness in Atomic Red Team is we have YAMLized all of our tests. So YAML is yet another markdown language, and basically what we're trying to do here is make these portable and make them executable from other frameworks. So Chris Gates has Meta, there's APT Simulator. There's a bunch of different utilities. They're already set up to consume different techniques and then execute them. So we want to make it easy. We wanted to make it really simple just to say, hey, everyone can just consume from us. Treat our tests like Metasploit modules. We'll just put them all out here and you guys execute them on whatever framework you want. So that's what we're working on right now. I believe all of our techniques that are out there now have a YAML equivalent. And then those are the ones that actually spit out the markdown. So On the right there, Lee Holmes was nice enough to build some PowerShell automation, which we're still tweaking a little bit to work with the new YAML format. So we're working on a couple of different fronts. Definitely, this next slide is very important. Definitely feel free to come and join us and help build some of these things. There's a lot of techniques that we don't necessarily have covered yet, but we need better coverage. The great thing about this, if you've ever wanted to get into open source development or contributing to open source projects, it takes about 15 minutes to research one of these techniques, find somebody who has done something like this, and then make your own test. So find somebody else's research and say, okay, I'm just going to make a very simple test to test this one thing, and then submit it. And we have a Slack that we just created not too long ago. Got some really, really bright people from the industry in there. Me, Mike, and Casey, some other folks from our organization. We're all hanging out in there, so we can help you start using this. AtomicRedTeam.io. There's also some other materials in there so you can get started. But yeah, please come. It's probably one of the lower drag ways to get involved with open source. And obviously, if you have any questions, you can email us at research@redcanary. Those are all of our Twitter handles. And AtomicRedTeam.com is actually another site that we have all the historical blog and webinars that we've done blog posts and a lot of workshops so that you could get started with this and actually start using some of these techniques. So I feel like I've been talking for a long time. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So what's your test phase look like now, and what are your priorities or goals you really want to work on?
So the question was, kind of what are our priorities in the project now? So Mac and Linux needs love. Mike and Casey are great at coming up with a lot of different ways to do things in Windows systems, but we definitely need some more. We need some more love. Windows has love. Windows has so much love. The Unix guys need some love. So and those are actually some of the easier techniques to employ because a lot of it's just coming out of a shell script. So it's kind of lends itself to easier testing. So good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you guys.